Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, the East Bay's best podcast. Hosted by Jared Asch, bringing you in-depth conversations with the leaders shaping your community.
I am joined today by Brandon Cardwell with the City of Livermore, and we're going to talk about economic development and innovation among many other things that are happening in Livermore. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Brandon, first, for those of people who are listening that aren't familiar with Livermore or might only know one thing, tell us just a little bit about the community and then tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. I grew up in Livermore. I'm probably uniquely qualified to talk about its history and its present and where it's going. I've been with the City of Livermore for almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years next month. I've worked for the city and grew up in the community from the time I was very young. My kids are actually third generation Livermore residents now, which means they get extra votes at council meetings. For those on the inside, they know what I'm talking about. Livermore is the easternmost city in the Bay Area, essentially. It sits at the eastern end of Alameda County. It's at the base of the Altamont Pass. We're celebrating our 150th anniversary this year, our birthday as a city. And it was built around this railroad downtown, kind of traditional historic railroad grid pattern downtown. And then it also has these two national labs. And the downtown and the national labs in the wine country, these things all exist in this interesting symbiotic relationship. Our mayor likes to say, Mayor Marchand likes to say, Livermore is a city of contrasts and superlatives, right? We have the world's most energetic laser and the world's fastest rodeo. And he has a number of these things that it's very entertaining to hear him talk about it. We have this historic downtown that is thriving and doing really well, even in a kind of post-COVID environment. Lots of building going on there. We have South Livermore wine country and ag area. The wine industry globally is not doing particularly well. Our wine industry is holding up better than most. And then we have these two national labs that employ around 12,000 people between the two of them. Fusion has been a big topic lately, but we hold these dueling identities of science and innovation and agriculture, viticulture, and historic downtown. And then we've got 22-ish million square feet of industrial and flex real estate, which creates this very interesting manufacturing economy and supply chain that's here. We've got a lot of faces to this community, which I think makes it very interesting, but also is a challenge at times to think about the brand components and how do you talk about this community and what it is and what it can deliver to different audiences. But it's really a wonderful place to raise a family. I have two boys. My wife and I are raising our kids here. We both grew up here, went to high school here, and came back and planted roots ourselves and got a lot of family in town. And we just consistently hear about what an amazing place it is to raise children, especially for Bay Area people who are moving from Silicon Valley, San Francisco, the peninsula, out looking for a little bit of a different quality of life, but still with lots of access to economic opportunity. My job, I say that we're in the business of jobs, money, and fun. That's what economic development is really focused on. And my role is a little bit different because I also have our municipal airport under my department, as well as our city property portfolio, in addition to traditional economic development kinds of activities, business engagement, attraction, real estate development and negotiation, things like that.
You definitely sit on top of a lot of things. In addition to a traditional downtown, which I want to touch on, you guys have the outlet stores or within the city, right? Which is a big economic sales tax driver, correct?
It's a huge portion of our overall sales tax portfolio. It's also one of the most trafficked tourism or shopping destinations in the state. The outlets opened, I think it was 2012, 2013, somewhere around that time. Then Black Friday is a major event. The outlets are big, and they're also a really good example of what happens when you have a first mover anchor that comes in and what gets built around that. Because you had the Simon or Paragon and then Simon built out the outlets, and it's just done phenomenally well, both for us as a revenue generator, but also it's just a really beautiful environment. But this is an open air outlet that has a lot of food and beverage in it as well. And then you've seen Republic Urban Properties built Republic Square. You have the shops, you have Pacific Pearl on the Pleasanton side that have really built out into a shopping and dining destination that sits at the intersection of Livermore and Pleasanton. It's had a tremendous amount of success and has really been a boon for the city from a fiscal standpoint in terms of delivery of services and infrastructure.
Talk to us a little bit about the downtown Where does it stand now? How
Yeah.
is it doing both in traditional office, retail, restaurants? What's the vibe like? And what are your plans? What's your vision for it?
This is one of my favorite things to talk about, probably because the Livermore that I grew up in did not really have a downtown. It had First Street that was great for cruising cars back and forth, kind of American graffiti style. But when I was a kid, there was the comic book store. And in the back of a furniture shop in downtown, the longtime Livermore residents will remember there was a baseball card kind of stand that my brother and I would go and shop for baseball cards. And there were a handful of taquerias and restaurants and things. It was a 4-lane highway, State Route 84, which is now Isabel Avenue, that runs up from 580 down to 680, used to run through the middle of downtown Livermore. We had to, about 25 years ago, start the process of rerouting a state highway from the middle of our downtown, that we could collapse it down to 2 lanes in each direction, expand outdoor dining, widen the sidewalks, put in a lot of trees. There was this massive civic investment, not only financially, but just the trauma of making such a huge change in any community. I know you know how difficult it can be to drive a significant change to the built environment in a community, even if what is promised is better than what is current. People get really anchored to the status quo. That was a major project that some incredibly visionary elected officials and city administrators started. And that happened while I was away at college. I joked with our former city manager that it was very nice of him to build me a downtown while I was away at school. I had something nice to come home to. So there was a residential component to that, and then really a refacing and the storefront support project for downtown to create a streetscape that invited restaurants to come and capitalize on the phenomenal weather and 300 days of sunshine that we have here. First Street, really from P Street, where the Vine Cinema is, which is our kind of art house independent cinema, all the way down to Maple Street, where our other large movie theater is. That whole First Street area has just seen tremendous growth in food and beverage, entertainment. It's starting to move out onto Second Street. We have on Railroad, we have some new interesting developments going on. We've made some public investments in free parking facilities and structured parking. And it's an unbelievable success story. I think it exceeds any of our wildest imaginations going back to the beginning of that project. And I think what really makes it work is it has 2 identities. It has this very family-friendly identity that's the before 9:30, 10 o'clock identity of I can go and I can take my kids down and we can go have pizza. We can go down and get some Chinese food or go to a taqueria or do whatever we want to do. And then the kids can run around out in the park spaces that we've created in Stockman's Park and at Carnegie Park. And we have our Livermorium Plaza and all these great public third spaces. And then we can go home and that's that. And then the late night crowd comes out, which is increasingly these roving bands of like young single people. The Livermore that I remember, it was always a great family environment, but now you're seeing this really strong nightlife component. We essentially have an all day, all night. And I think that's what is really setting our downtown apart from others that are struggling to stay open past 9:30 or 10, because there really isn't a community of younger people or empty nesters for that matter, who want to come out and have cocktails with friends and see live music. And our arts and culture, I think, contributes to that as well. We have a really long history of live music and comedy and other things here. But it's really going really well. And we have the Blacksmith Square, which is a flagship project in our downtown, is just completing its expansion right now. They're building 3 new buildings. 2 of them are done, and they're doing tenant improvements right now for some really exciting businesses that are coming in. The 3rd building will be completed, I think, within the year. And then we've got a new event center coming into downtown, which I think will help with corporate events, rehearsal dinners, weddings, et cetera. And then we're starting now to think about our downtown 2.0 strategy. What does the next phase of this look like? Where does growth occur? Are we moving more in a grid pattern, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Street? Are we thinking about revitalization of some of the old centers there that haven't benefited as much from the revitalization and doing some focused investment there? It's a very exciting time, but we're really grateful that businesses continue to see Livermore as a place that they can invest, because that's what all of this is based on. Is I say often that economic development is in the business of manufacturing optimism. Do you believe as a business, if I invest here and grow here, that I'm going to end up better or worse than someplace else? We continue to benefit from that confidence and try to do our best to honor it.
The city leadership at the time developed a long-term plan, right? Move a highway, redo the sidewalks for outdoor dining, build little parks, kids can run around. It was really this vision and a long-term outlook, which I know a lot of politicians have trouble with, 4-year cycles, 2-year cycles. And I give credit for that. And it sounds like that's part of the success.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that long-termist mindset is really important. I've been here for 20 years. I've had the benefit of watching this organization evolve and seeing lots of different city councils. I'm on my third city manager at this point. And I think, I don't know if it's culture or luck or, what it is, but you really can't overstate the importance of having just very serious, rational people who are focused on the problem being in positions of leadership, whether that's at the council or the administrator level. And we've just been extremely fortunate. We have not had city councils that get bogged down in things that are outside their purview or that really don't touch directly the quality of life of their constituents. And I think we've seen that Livermore was, for a long time, a mix of kind of lab people and blue collar people. I come from one of those blue collar families. I'm a first gen college student. My dad, he's one of the smartest people I know, but did not go to college for family and all kinds of other reasons, had to go out on his own. My mom, same thing, just very bright people who didn't have opportunities to go to college. Livermore was a place they could afford at the time, and they raised my brother and I here. And what we've seen since the downtown revitalization is an influx of whatever you want to call it, knowledge workers, professional managerial class, where this sort of was blue collar and lab, no degree, advanced degree. And now we're seeing this sort of in between where I think the outward compression of the Bay Area and home prices, combined with the increasing desirability of our community, has made it a really nice place for people to want to come and live. That long-term vision, I think, has created an environment where more and more people want to live here. That's led to the creation of more housing. We've seen a tripling of our home values in the last 20 years, for better or worse. Great if you're an incumbent homeowner, not good if you're in the market. We've got to think about how we address some of those things, but continuing to take a long-term view, whether that's in housing, planning for housing, and not just the sort of state mandate stuff. We talk about that all the time, but thinking about housing as an asset. Every house, it contains someone's employee, someone's little league coach, someone's customer, someone's volunteer. Housing is an asset. And I realize that communities have trouble with that sometimes, but I think if you can articulate a long-term vision, if you can maintain high quality standards for design and make it so that it functions within the rest of the city, and you can demonstrate that over and over again. And maybe most importantly, and this is something we've really been focused on, is delivering community benefits from development projects that the entire community can feel as tangible. Yeah. You can see when you build stuff, you get stuff. I think that's a really important thing to do, but you have to have that long-term vision. I think you're right.
You're very unique that you have 2 national labs, probably the only city in the country that has 2. Berkeley has 1. What is the advantage of that from an economic development standpoint? How does that impact what you do versus your counterpart in any other city in the Bay Area?
There are 2 really concrete answers I'll give you, and then one that we're constantly working on and we've had some pretty good success with and some good success outcomes lately. One is the labs are employers, right? They bring in as employees to this community thousands of people who, many of whom are in that advanced degree category. They have high levels of discretionary income. Like any other knowledge employer, you got people who are physicists and high level managers and engineers and all these kinds of, they employ machinists and they employ operations people and security, and they pay very good wages for those things too, because a lot of the work is highly specialized. The specialty nature of the work that is done there, it makes them a very important source of kind of injecting wage capital into the community. The second piece that's very concrete is that they are a procurer. Livermore has this unbelievable and under the radar network of precision machine shops, design engineering shops, just all the kind of supply chain. Because the labs work in such small batch quantity, you have a lot of these producers who can just do things that, will work in. But I think as we start to see, I'm foreshadowing my third part here, As we see the rise of the fusion industry with Inertia and Pacific Fusion is still here, did move their pilot plant or elect their pilot plant into Mexico, but they have a very strong presence still here in Livermore. As that industry scales up, all that supply chain that's been feeding the labs is going to be able to be dual purpose for those industries. The employment piece, the procurement piece, and then I think it was just yesterday or the day before, Inertia and the lab announced essentially the largest cooperative research and development and special project framework in the history of the national labs. Inertia is doing this CRADA and this what they call SPPs, where they essentially hire the lab to do things for them. Inertia is located just down the street in 50,000 square feet of industrial space on the east side of Livermore. And they continue to work with the labs to commercialize the laser inertial confinement fusion technology that NIF pioneered out into the marketplace. And I think we see there's an increasing opportunity to help companies cluster around the labs when they want to do these kinds of partnerships, because the labs really, I think, accelerated its enthusiasm for external partnerships in light of how frothy this fusion industry is and related areas. We want to be here to help welcome those companies. As the lab, we work with the lab all the time. We want the labs to introduce us to their academic and industry partners. We can help them find locations here. We can help them locate people here. We can clear the path if we need to be working with our development partners to build facilities to accommodate them. And we want to make sure that we are a few steps ahead of what the next need is going to be for the companies that are scaling here because of the presence of the two labs.
Fusion's an interesting topic, and maybe say in 10 seconds or less what fusion is, but talk about how do you compete for more companies in the space? You're limited because of CEQA, you're limited because New Mexico, in that case, offered millions of dollars in untouched lands and state tax credits that you can't compete with. Give us some perspective on just all of that. And
it's not easy. California does not have a good reputation as a state to do business in, but it does have a great reputation. And the reality is that California's talent pipeline is second to none. I think, what we need to be doing, and we are actively doing this, including with other partners. We work with friends in San Diego who are also very focused on fusion. We work with our state legislators. Senator McNerney has been an admirable leader on this space, and we go up and testify in front of Senate committees on legislation. I think there are a couple of things to this. One is, so at the local level, make sure you have clear path for these emerging technology companies, whether it's fusion, which we spend a lot of time on, but also advanced air mobility and the EVTOL industry. As I said, the airport is under my department. We spend a lot of time working on advanced industries and aviation, or others where we think we have some unique attributes. We don't want to try to be something we're not. Like Livermore's never going to be the AI capital of California. That's pretty clear. But I think we do have a really strong role to play in these industrial innovation sectors like fusion and M. We need to have the land available. We need to have at least a CEQA environmental strategy, which may include things for at least as long as it exists, like the CEQA exemptions that were recently brought in for advanced manufacturing info projects, which is part of what we leveraged for the Pacific Fusion project that unfortunately didn't work out. But the approach is still sound. Thinking about where can you put these projects that you can tier off of existing environmental, like at our Oaks Business Park, where we have 2.5 million square feet of industrial tech real estate already. How do we build adjacent to those things and take advantage of infrastructure? I think we don't have a lot of off-the-shelf incentive packages. I'm not a big fan of doing that. I think if you've seen one deal, you've seen one deal, and you need to take a tailored approach to working with a company and applicant for whom time might be more important than money, or certainty might be more important than money. But every deal is a little bit different, but we maintain a flexible and creative approach to how we do those deals. And then we've started building a war chest of funding through our community benefit negotiations that I hinted at in terms of the development agreements that we negotiate, to make sure that we have the financial resources that we need to be able to close the gap. If there's a project cost or a fee that's just really getting somebody and it's standing in the way, but we can clearly see the value return in a way that we think we can justify to our decision makers in our community, we definitely want to come to the table around that.
you're talking developer fees to the city, right?
Well, I think every project has a cost stack, right? And there's a limit to how much we can really control there. But we can do a fee deferment that revenue starts being generated before some large traffic impact fee or something else is due. We also can look at tax abatements if we think that there's a strong justification for it. If a company's coming in and they're bringing us a ton of really high-end equipment that's going to generate a lot of unsecured property tax, and otherwise we wouldn't have it, then we can look at, do we do some short-term abatement to help move things along? I think we always want to be open to this idea. At the local level, there is a limit, as you said, when New Mexico threw hundreds of millions of dollars in tax credits, essentially at Pacific Fusion, we're not going to overcome that on our own. I don't expect the state of California to be in the game, that much. But I think we have to look at what are our unique advantages, and then also be as rigorous about what are our deficiencies and deficits at a state or local level, and then how do we overcome those things? And that requires coordination. We need to work with GoBiz, and we've done a lot of work with Trey Bradley at GoBiz and others over there about how we help these companies navigate what is available through the state. How do we improve what's available through the state? And how do we put together a compelling pitch that covers state, county, local to say, this is the place that you want to be? But again, we've got to manufacture that optimism and make believers out of these companies, because the hardcore resources that are being thrown at them by Texas and New Mexico and other places, it's really tough to compete with. And if you've got a CFO who is involved in that conversation from the company, your charming smile isn't going to get you that far.
I like your collaborative approach. Do you find that those other agencies are also into the collaboration and figuring out how to work with you to add value?
I think the intent is certainly there. I think there are some structural and systemic challenges that all government bureaucracies face in terms of how quickly they can change their approach. I think the intent is there on the collaboration, but the structural and systemic challenges of that quickly changing what a government bureaucracy can do can be rough. And if you've got CalCompete's tax credits, as an example, are not very useful to venture-backed companies, even if they've got $1 billion in venture funding, because they don't have any tax liability. They're just burning money. That system doesn't work. That kind of order off the menu thing isn't really getting the job done. I think what we've been trying to work with our state partners on is, can we all get in the game together and figure out how to put a deal together that is going to get some of these really marquee companies who have high scale potential to choose California? And we are getting a lot of, I think, receptivity to that. And then there's some legislative and other kind of rulemaking work that's focused on making some of those changes. But moving at the speed of the legislature may be insufficient to the task. Some of these companies are making some of their buying decisions pretty early. I think we've got to try to anticipate this. And that means, and this is where I will give the state a lot of credit, is they've spent an enormous amount of time learning about this industry, fusion in particular, going to the California Fusion convening, coming to our events, and spending time with the Fusion Industry Association, which has been enormously helpful in educating about what is important here. I think they really are understanding the scale of the challenge, and now it's just going to be how quickly and how aggressively can we respond to it.
Let's talk about your unique geographic area. You said earlier is the most eastern city in the Bay Area. There's a ton of workforce for Livermore itself, but also the whole Bay Area comes in over that Altamont Pass. What is the impact to that in your community?
Sure. You got, I think, somewhere in the area of 110,000 cars coming over the Altamont Pass every morning, plus goods movement. It's one of the worst commutes in the country. And northern San Joaquin County and the broader Central Valley area has built a lot more. And their city coffers, at least today, are benefiting from that, property tax and increased sales tax, all that kind of stuff. In any case, a lot of the growth in California from a population standpoint is happening in northern San Joaquin Valley. And Livermore, and the Tri-Valley generally, Livermore in particular, sits at the exact intersection of this Bay Area innovation economy and the Central Valley, I'll call it fabrication-oriented talent pool. Increasingly, you even have people moving over the hill who are advanced degree holders, and a lot of folks who work at the lab in science and technology are moving over the hill just because it's hard to find housing in the Bay Area. But historically, you've had a lot of the skilled trades and skilled fabrication workforce has lived on that side of the Altamont Pass, and the Bay Area innovation economy has been over here. And I think from our standpoint, that puts us in a really strong position to exist in this industrial innovation space. And that a little bit in places like Livermore, you have Lamb Research and Form Factor and Gillig and some of these companies that a lot of their workforce is coming in from the Central Valley, but they hire a lot of engineers and managers and sales and ops people from the Bay Area. Pleasanton, you see the same thing. It's life sciences, but what kind of life sciences is it? It's diagnostic devices and research tools, right? It's the physical thing that has to be made, even though it's got some deeply innovative IP inside of it. I think that's really where our strength is. Deep tech, hard tech, frontier tech, whatever you want to call it. Valley Link is, for those who don't know, is this train system that would be connecting, as of their latest alignment, at the Vasco Road ACE train station. Central Valley ACE train commuter could ride the train over the Altamont, get off at Vasco station, get on a Valley Link station, and then take that to the East Evan Pleasanton BART station and have full Bay Area connectivity. Because right now, ACE and BART come within, 12 miles of each other, whatever it is, but they don't connect. And that's the problem that Valley Link's trying to solve. I think there's a workforce attraction benefit to Livermore of getting people coming both directions from the Bay Area and the Central Valley into Livermore. And then there's helping Livermore residents and Central Valley residents access the broader Bay Area. It's one of those kind of short distance gaps that, if filled, seems like it would make both systems function a lot better. Yeah.
How do you use the airport as an economic development tool? How is it shifting from what it was to what it could be?
We have an airport development strategy that we took to our city council, I think a little over a year ago now. And the way the airport ended up in my department, because it used to be in public works, was my team led an airport land use and development study in partnership with the airport management. And at the end of that, what we really came to understand was the airport has 80 to 100 acres of developable land. There are some constraints on it. The FAA has rules about what you can do on the operating area, but be that as it may. And maybe more importantly, the airport is already a mobility asset for local companies. The companies that use that airport are Costco and Workday and Peterson Cat, and all of these local companies are flying in and out of the airport all the time. And when you think about that at some kind of scale, including potentially electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles for moving talent quietly and cleanly across the Bay Area, we really saw that mobility was a major asset and could potentially flip on its head. But if instead we were the city that you landed in when you stepped off your EVTOL, that totally inverts that talent issue. I think there's still a lot of certification work that has to happen on EVTOLs. There's community acceptance stuff we're going to have to get through, but EVTOLs was one part of our airport development strategy. Another part was just building additional hangars to accommodate more. We have a long wait list for hangars. That's a basic airport function. It's just building some more hangars. That was the second part. The third part was a multi-agency public safety complex to try and increase resiliency in the face of disasters here and just generally public safety. That has tangential economic development benefits because having a bunch of police and firefighters and other first responders in your community taking off out of your facilities is good for your local restaurants and things like that. The fourth part was an innovation center. And that's a project that I'm actively working on right now. But that's a retrofit of an 18,000 square foot building into a facility that will include equipment user facilities and then leasable suites for advanced air mobility, fusion, and other frontier tech companies located at the airport. That we're working through design right now and get through construction, hoping to have an open date of the end of 2027 for that project.
Okay. That's coming up then if you're designing that. And out of the 80-ish acres of developable land, how much is that 19,000 square foot facility taking up?
Virtually none.
Okay. Yeah. That's not a huge.
Yeah. On the developable land, what we would be looking at is industrial facilities for the manufacture of aviation-related technologies. If Joby or Wisk or Archer or one of these eVTOL companies wanted to actually create a manufacturing plant, or even a supplier is creating a component part that's going to go into those, wanted to create a manufacturing plant, we can do ground leases on the airport for third-party development to support those companies and let them be part of an aviation ecosystem. So if I wanted to sum up, answer your question more directly about the airport, it's about talent mobility, including drawing customers in for our tourism assets here. It's about supporting emerging technology through the Innovation Center. It's about resilience, disaster resilience, social resilience through the public safety complex. Those are the things we're really looking at. And then, of course, there are tax and other benefits to the city from facilitating that additional development.
I know we talked about innovation related to like fusion, lasers, and things from an economic development standpoint. From a city standpoint and from a Brandon standpoint, how are you looking at shifting your job to incorporate innovation, AI, to become more efficient and effective with what Livermore's doing?
In terms of how I do
Internally,
my job,
how do you do your job better? What are you looking at? What is the city looking at?
I think it's trying to ground the work more in data and less in vibes, right?
Yep.
I think the knock on economic development historically, and I have this habit of I continue to hire planners into the economic development profession, which has been really advantageous for me because I like having a land use function inside of my shop, is we don't want economic development to be the hand wavy brochures and events business. I just don't think that's nearly as useful as maybe it once was when companies didn't have access to as much data about their own buying decisions. Like you simply cannot go to Whole Foods and jazz hands your way into getting them to ignore their heat map of customer data. Like you're just not going to do that, right? You have to be contemporary in that approach. When you think about how companies are making their decisions, they're looking at workforce and labor sheds. They're looking at household numbers and household discretionary income. And you just can't overwhelm that data with any level of persuasion. And attending every event isn't going to get you anywhere if you don't have a rigorously tested pitch and you're not really focused on sectors and even down to the company level where you can provide a concrete value proposition. We look at things, obviously we use a lot of the similar tools others do. We look at CoStar, we've used Lighthouse and some of the other tools. We're piloting an AI tool right now that was born out of a Stanford lab that was actually focused on utility scale solar and trying to find really optimized sites for that. And they realized it had economic development applications because the LLM could be trained to look at particular sectors where our city has unique strengths and assets, and then look within that sector what companies are displaying buying signs or scaling signs, and then create essentially a pipeline for me of deal flow that I can go and talk to individual companies. We're trying to leverage as many tools as we can and kind of stay on the cutting edge of that, because if not, we end up just increasingly apart from the people who are our actual customers. I think that's a big piece of it. Some of it is just still brute force, going out, talking to your businesses, figuring out what they're experiencing, what they're going through, and being a trusted partner. There's no replacement for that. But you also need to be able to provide the kind of data-centric information that brokers and developers and all the other members of your ecosystem need to be able to manufacture that optimism, like I was talking about earlier.
And one other key area I want to touch on along innovation and your tech sector and labs is you guys created out of the city startup Tri-Valley. Yolanda, who's been on before, but that's a unique quasi government role, but that came out of your shop. Talk a little bit about your thought process originally behind that and your goals for it and how government can help foster that private sector.
IGATE, which is the parent organization of Daybreak Labs and Startup Tri-Valley, was formed out of the Economic Development Office of the city back in 2009, 2010. I joined the economic development part of the city coming out of Public Works in 2011 and was there to help open the first incubator. And then ultimately in 2014, I went on to become the executive director of that organization, which is the role that Yolanda plays now. And I did that until about 2022. I have run and built out startup incubators three, four times here. And that original idea was anchored around the national labs as technology assets that were going to produce scalable companies. I think what we've realized is the labs are not startup factories, right? They're not Y Combinator. They're not going to spin out dozens of companies every year. They are relatively low frequency, but incredibly high impact partners in startup creation. And you see that Inertia is this just powerhouse of a company that has partnered with the lab, but they'll probably be one of one, I think, for a little while. There was a need to pivot and go a little broader than that. And the IGATE organization has gone through many iterations. But I think at the end of the day, what IGATE did and continues to do for the City of Livermore, because we remain its largest funder and a very active partner in that, is it gives us a perspective that we otherwise wouldn't have. I get to go and spend time with startup companies in the incubator. I get to go and with Yolanda and talk to venture firms and others where, most of people in my position, a lot of their days are spent talking to brokers and developers, and those are really worthwhile relationships. There are other people who are worth talking to as well. And understanding the perspective of seed stage entrepreneurs who are looking to scale, venture firms who are looking to advise their companies on where they should locate, and just seeing what that part of the innovation economy looks like, and recognizing the importance of customers, talent, capital, and infrastructure, and how you have to be able to articulate that value proposition from a city standpoint has been really, I think, just an invaluable part of spending time actively working within the startup ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's a unique perspective, but it ties into everything else we talked about, right? Brandon, anything I haven't asked you that you want to touch on before we head out?
Our cities all have boundaries, but the boundaries are probably more important to the elected officials and the city staff than they are to the people who live in them. I think that it's such an important component of our regionalism here. The Tri-Valley has long sent all of our mayors back to Washington, D.C. to lobby together as part of the mayor's conference. We've lobbied for transportation funding. We've lobbied for things like the open campus at the labs. And I think quarterly, I get together with all my counterparts in the other Tri-Valley cities because we recognize that we share this labor shed. We share this infrastructure pool. We're all dealing with the same things, and we are strong communities of interest. And I think we share a labor pool with the Central Valley, and we share a labor pool with the rest of the Bay Area. And I think we have to recognize how interdependent we are if we're going to continue. Livermore's home values didn't triple over the last 20 years just because we rebuilt a nice downtown. That was a major driver, but we are also really connected to the Bay Area innovation ecosystem. It's important that people in the Central Valley can get to the jobs that are here because our local employers rely on them as their workforce. I think we've got to think about that. And as we are all looking at what we want for the state, and then as elections come about this year at the local level, at the county level, I think we've got to be thinking about putting first things first and recognizing our interdependence and how we can work together to create more economic prosperity. Because that's really what we're all trying to do. At the end of the day, our systems need to work, our public safety systems need to work, our infrastructure needs to work, and we need to feel like we are going up and to the right in terms of our fiscal position and our economic opportunity.
I think you guys are a great example of the Tri-Valley of cities working together towards a bigger goal. I know in some ways you compete, but you guys just uniquely work better together for a strong regional economy. I'll give you guys credit for that.
I appreciate it.
Brandon Cardwell from the City of Livermore, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Capstone Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe and follow Jared Asch and Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Leave us a review and share this episode with a friend.